from career navigation and college readiness to teaching and intercultural dialogue. His main message focuses on the concept of design thinking, which I'm really excited to get into today. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great, Gotham. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a while since someone's read a bio like that. It made me feel all good inside. So I appreciate it for sure.
Yeah, it's been a new thing I've been trying. I actually wasn't doing that for the long time, but I realized, a lot of people work very hard throughout their lives and never get to just hear all the things that they've done. And so it is a refreshing way to start any episode where you feel appreciated, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I sometimes forget that I teach. So it's cool that you led with that because the SEIP, it's an amazing program at Georgetown where we have rising high school seniors come to campus during the summer. So these are high school students transitioning from their junior year to their senior year, mostly from historically marginalized racial backgrounds. So a lot of Black and Latinx students. And they're phenomenal, but I only see them for what 11, 12 days out of the summer, which is fantastic.
Mm,
So it's like a little micro course. So it's great that I could be able to say that I'm an educator. I feel like I do a lot of teaching through my speaking, like through the workshops that I give and things like that. But being able to rock out with a cool group of students for 11 days straight during the summer is also fantastic
mm.
too. So.
So what is that? What's the point of that 11 days and what do you guys kind of go over?
Man, so I could talk about the education technology course that I teach in the program, but I want to start by kind of outlining the program itself. And so we invite about 60 students from all over the country with our network charter schools. So Georgetown's Summer and Special Programs Department partners with Cristo Rey schools and KIPP Academy schools. Like these are different charter school networks throughout the country. And so we bring in these students that have aspirations to go to college. And it's a 3-week program that exposes students to what it's like to be on a college campus. So they actually stay. It's a
Mm,
residential program for 3 weeks. They get to learn more about the college application process. So they are actually putting together their personal statement that they're going to be submitting in August. And the program runs from late June to around mid July. So that's kind of like the 3 week period. And while they're there, so for 2 out of those 3 weeks, they get to take a, they get to actually take 2 courses at Georgetown. And so we have a catalog of about 8 courses that they could choose from. So some choose biology, some choose business. We have an anthropology course. And last year was the first time that they offered an education technology course, which is taught by me. And so the
mm,
director of their program kind of heard me talk at a conference about how important it is to expose Black and Latinx students to careers in education technology. And I'm particularly impassioned by that concept because technology careers in technology have always had access barriers for students from historically marginalized backgrounds, from the physical technology that students have had access to historically to like just even the process of earning a master's degree, right? Because I am in the program that I'm finishing up right now, finishing up my master's degree in an education technology program at Georgetown. I'm the first Black man in the history of that program. And so just thinking about the access barriers that Black and Latinx students face in
mm,
pursuing careers in education, and even just how those students think about education careers and getting them to understand that there are careers in education that are beyond being a teacher or that are beyond being a principal because that's what they're used to seeing. They're used to seeing their teachers in their classroom and principals, but what does it look like to work in education policy that influences technology? What does it look like to be a learning designer where you actually get to have control over the curriculum? In the work that I do with students, one of the number one reasons or complaints that I receive from students is like, I don't feel like what I'm learning is important. And
mhm.
so I'm engaging students in conversation about why that might be, like who actually decides the curriculum and how can technology be used to positively impact learning. And so that's kind of what I talk about in the course, and students seem to get a real kick out of that because we talk about everything from okay, how do you design a course? Like, what is the science behind teaching and learning? Like, what's happening in your brain as you're learning? To I actually have students put on VR headsets for the first time. For a lot of these students, they've never had on a virtual reality headset, so they don't even know what it's like to be in that environment. And so it's given students opportunities to explore a career path that a lot of them have never really had access to.
Hmm. What I'm hearing you say a lot of is exposure, which is something I've been thinking a lot about as of late. But it's this really important thing that allows a person to dream in simply just knowing what exists out there. I mean, the second you, and it often is done through people you meet, the media that you consume. Once you see somebody who opens a door, then all of a sudden it becomes possible for you to do it as well. And so I think these type of programs are amazing because you're right, it shows that okay, maybe I can be the type of person to be on a college campus. Maybe I am the person who can get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, or maybe I'm the person who can be an engineer. I mean, it runs so deep to even look at yourself in the mirror to be that I'm the type of person who can do this. And so I'm really curious what your journey was like that. So I wanted to kind of go back all the way to your childhood. So I know you grew up near Baltimore. Did you grow up in Baltimore or near Baltimore?
Baltimore County. I spent a
Okay.
lot of time in the city, so I played youth football in the city. I went to church in the city, so I kind of split time in both. But I went to elementary, middle, and high school in Baltimore County, so that was like my home base.
Yeah. So what was that like for you? I mean, and for a lot of the people that you met around you and students who, studied at schools near you, what was the process like to kind of see what else existed outside of kind of the bubbles that often form in places?
Yeah, so I was a late bloomer academically. I would say that I grew up as a rule follower. I had very strict parents, but that rule following for some reason did not translate to the classroom until really late in my academic career. So I was always involved in sports. I went from karate to basketball to football. And so that was kind of like an anchor for me. But it wasn't until my junior year of high school where I really started to take school seriously. And I talk about this one assignment that was really transformative for me. And this was around 2015, 2016, like somewhere around there. Freddie Gray was just murdered in police custody in Baltimore. So less than 20, 30 miles from where I grew up. And so this movement around social justice in response to the police violence or the violence against predominantly black men, but also black women and black individuals from the LGBTQIA plus community that was going on at that time and is still continuing was really top of mind for me as a young teenager and as a young black man who was watching these different black men get murdered at the hands of police. And so I had an assignment that allowed me to explore that. And the teacher that assigned that was like almost moved to tears by what I wrote about and just me being able to talk about my story freely. And she said, Jordan, if you could do this on an assignment, like you should be doing this all the time. You know what I'm saying? Like I've
Hmm.
never seen a student write with such clarity and passion and specificity as you do. And so that really planted a seed for me. And that was actually in my creative arts class. So I was exploring these things through art, and I was really started to develop my own identity that wasn't just an athlete, but I also started to value some of my gifts that I had when it came to written and oral communication. Fast forward about a year later, I'm doing a lot better academically, and I took a senior research course. And so I don't know if you did this in high school, but as a senior in high school, I had the opportunity to do like a senior research project. And the question that I chose was, why do students who love to learn hate school? Like that was the question for my research project. And what I realized through that project, I looked around and I talked to students on the football team. I was talking to students who were in my AP classes, my advanced placement classes. I even talked to our school valedictorian, and all of them had the same issue. Like all of them had the same gripe with our education system, and it's that I don't feel like what I'm learning is important. And
Hmm.
I really wanted to explore that. These students who are driven to learn and are learning everywhere, but not learning in the classroom where they're expected to. Why is that? Why is that happening? And yeah, and so that's kind of what started this path in education for me. It was really my teachers that cultivated my confidence in my academic abilities, and then allowed me, like, gave me an intentional space and empowered me to explore that a little further, right? To not just be frustrated by what was in the curriculum, but to explore why that is. You know, why do we learn what we learn, and why do teachers teach the way that they teach? And how can we improve education through those two mediums? So,
I think that question is so profound and beautiful of why do we learn what we learn? Who decides it? And how
mhm.
is it then taught? I mean, I think all three of those questions have so much depth in it. And so, what was kind of your process to exploring these questions, and what were some of your findings?
Yeah, so it's a really simple method, honestly. I did a school-wide survey. So I was running around trying to get people to scan this QR code and like log on to the Google Forms to fill out the survey. And I got students from ninth grade all the way up to 12th grade, like a variety of students. And they all essentially said the same thing. So I would ask questions like, do you feel like what you're learning in school will help you in the future? And a lot of students said no, right? These are students that are taking really hard math classes and really hard science classes. And obviously, when you drop into any school, you're going to have students who are interested in a ton of different things, right? Like across the
Mm,
spectrum. But almost all of the students who completed the survey thought that their education was somehow incomplete, or they thought that what they were learning
mm,
in the classroom, it was decontextualized, so they couldn't see, even if they were interested in their science class or their art class, there wasn't a clear idea of what that would look like after graduation. And
yeah.
students want to learn about things like how our political system works. They want to learn about things like, how do taxes work? Like, taxes is like this really scary, confusing thing that students are thinking about in high school. And I wanted to explore, like, why aren't students learning about that? And really, my takeaway from working in higher ed for a couple of years and just kind of navigating undergrad is that to give students that level of education, I call it's called really critical pedagogy. So getting students to be critical of the systems around them, and to do so with curiosity, to do so with love, to do so with passion, right? I'm not saying that students have to necessarily bash our social systems or call them bad or poor, but they have the right to if they want to, right? And so looking at our social systems, the way that they're constructed, look at our different caste systems and our power dynamics within our institutions, and be able to really learn about, okay, like, why is our political system constructed the way it is? Like, why is the electoral college a thing? A lot of it was designed to cement white supremacy, to cement the white male patriarchy at that time. And so, and a lot of those remnants still stay with us today. And so, allowing students to explore those types of questions. And from that survey, from that research that I did, students wanted to learn about things that they didn't have the opportunity to learn about in their curriculum. So,
Hmm. So, one thing I'm really curious because I think what you bring up is a fascinating point, and I'm excited over this next few months to dive more into this concept of critical pedagogy, which is in all my experiences of teaching, one thing I've never failed to find is people who want to learn. I mean, I think learning as a whole, regardless of what it is such a beautiful self exploration that it's hard to not find joy in learning about, how your car works or your refrigerator broke and then you figured out how to fix it and you learned how to, it doesn't, there's such a wide range of learning could encapsulate all of that. And I think people have this deep joy of learning. But I think what ends up happening is, so I'm a huge proponent of one-on-one mentoring of smaller, capacity student to teacher ratios. But what ends up happening is when you're working with such large scales, 100 million students, 50 million students, and not that same number of teachers, you end up getting into these situations where you have a lot of people crammed into one classroom. So you got 30 to 1, you got 40 to 1 sometimes. And in undergrad, you had 100 to 1. And then you can no longer be really individualized to every single specific person's needs. And so my question is, how do you think in what you've seen, can we balance these two where we have to work to help as many people as possible, but when we work to deal with a lot of people's different needs, some people end up getting left out. How do we balance those two?
students have their own expertise. And so part of it is a lot of how our education, a lot of how our classrooms are currently constructed, teachers are still expected to lead the learning in the
Mm,
classroom. And so, even when we look at the way that our desks are designed, if you walk into most classrooms today, desks are lined up in rows and they're all facing the front of the classroom where the teacher is supposed to be at the front of the classroom doing a thing where students are listening, taking notes, and things like that. I think we can completely redesign the classroom so that students are not only empowered by their own expertise, but are learning from the students around them. And so it's this idea that expertise is not just quantitative research. Expertise is not just the number of years working in a position. Expertise is also lived experience. And so, as an educator, if you have a class of 40 students, we focus so much on classroom management and harm reduction and preventing students from doing things that might warrant disciplinary action. But if you engage students in learning to the point where they see themselves as experts, finding solutions to the problems that they want to solve, contextualized within a particular class, right? Like, I'm not saying that like everything goes, and we can even go through some pedagogical examples, but I think we can give students the opportunity to reflect on their learning, which we don't do a whole lot, give students the opportunity to learn from each other. And because of how competitive our education systems are, from both the student to student level, right? So, especially when we get into high school and college, students feel like they have to compete against each other in order to get
mm,
certain jobs, in order to get certain scholarships, in order to get into certain colleges. So, that competitive nature is already within students to the point where I'm not talking to you about my homework because I'm worried about me and I'm worried about getting my grade, right? So, it's dismantling
mm,
the student to student competitiveness, but also schools are competing against each other for scarce resources, for the best teachers, right? Some schools are even competing with each other for the best students, the students that haven't been expelled or suspended. They're competing for the students that don't have any learning challenges or learning disabilities, like all of these different things that are really sinister about our education system, a lot of it based in white supremacy and competition. I think we can completely dismantle that, and students want to dismantle, students in a lot of ways want to dismantle that, and they want to feel like their learning is connected to their personal lives, but sometimes that connection isn't always so explicit, and so it's on the facilitation skills of the teacher to set up those small groups conversations. So again, students are able to learn and build things with each other within a classroom context.
mm. I think you bring up a really interesting point here, which is changing the entire view itself on the relationship that should exist between the quote unquote teacher and the quote unquote student. The more
Yeah.
blurry that line becomes, I think it's a very interesting kind of new perspective to take on how that dynamic should even be. So there's
Yeah.
something I am curious about getting into. So, um, I think it's a very important conversation to be had that I don't think happens enough in um, especially higher academia, is this concept of white supremacy. And you've used that a few times. So, one question I have is, if you could, because I think for each person what those words mean is very different, and so I think sometimes it's hard to know whether one person's understanding of what white supremacy means is the same as another. So I'm very curious to understand, when you use that phrase, what does it mean to you, and what are your thoughts on how those ideas have then impacted and infiltrated education?
Yeah. So I feel like white supremacy is also linked with this idea of white mediocrity in the sense of we use model minority myths and we use the tokenization of black people who have black people, Latinx people, indigenous people in this country that have been able to achieve success, but have gone through so much and have endured so much trauma in the process of achieving that level of success or achieving that status, to where whiteness says we put these people on a pedestal because if if they could do it, right? If they could overcome these systems of oppression, then you're expected to do that too. And so it's under the assumption that in the US we live in what's called a meritocracy. and this idea that what you have it because you earned it, and what you have it because you worked for it. And that isn't always the case, right? And we know that because of our history of enslavement in this country, because we have denied women the right to vote for generations in this country, like all of these different systems that were set in place, again, to have the white, straight, conventionally attractive man to have a majority of the power in this country. And so we still see remnants of that today again. And so is it easier to be is it easier to live a more fulfilling and successful life as a black man today than it was in 1960 or 1950 or 1940? Absolutely. Like without question. But we are still in a position where historically marginalized groups in this country have to do so much in order to get to a place of wellness, in order to get to a place of financial security. And a lot of that is because of the social systems that were constructed by the founders of this country, who were all white men, and that's just straightforward. And so it's not to villainize white people. Um, it's not to do that at all. I actually kind of sympathize with the white people, and I realize that white trauma is a real thing. I'm in a lot of conversations now with faculty who are engaging the topic of difficult conversations in their classrooms, and so we have students who are personally and then also in a secondhand way affected by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We have students that are having climate change as like the center of their attention right now, like all of these different social challenges that are coming up for students who experience grief and loss in their journey, and faculty seeing the opportunity to connect what they're trying to get students to learn to the lived experiences of the students in their classroom, so that their learning
Mm,
sticks, so that learning is deeper. And what the one of the main things that I've learned in engaging with this type of work with faculty on, like, how to facilitate a discussion about depression in your class, or like how to facilitate a discussion around global war and conflict in your class, like these really hard, heavy topics, is that even students who, at least in the American context, have a lot of privilege, they too have experienced trauma. And they've experienced trauma when it comes to engaging in these conversations, in the sense that, like, for example, I've talked to several white students who have said a thing that they've really regretted in a conversation about racism in the class, for example, or who have tried to take more of a learning posture and have sat back in those conversations and have been intentionally called out by the historically marginalized identities in the room in a way that forces them to shut down. Like it causes them to like clam up or shut down. And I feel like that is trauma that they're experiencing in some of those conversations. So I feel like we can do a lot of this stuff better. Even going back to the beginning, because I kind of preview like the founding fathers aspect of things, and like how a lot of our social systems were kind of built by, straight white men. The fact that public beheadings of people was like a sign of entertainment. Like that was like a form of entertainment. Like the desensitization to death and harm and violence, a lot of us in American culture have experienced that. And so that is a form of trauma too. And so you probably heard of trauma informed pedagogy, allowing our learning spaces to be more trauma informed. And that's not just for the historically marginalized groups, understanding that all of us are experiencing trauma, and we're not putting one group's trauma over the others, but identifying that we have these systems of power that um, that are advantageous to those that do not have those historically marginalized identities. And so, how can we come to terms with that as a group, right? Like, how can we
mm,
learn about how we show up in the world, and how we can, all be well and more trauma informed. So,
mm. Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing. One thing I'm very interested to hear, and I want to understand your perspective more on this, is what do you think are specific parts of the education system that have been influenced by the history of the US, which includes a lot of what you were talking about?
first thing that comes to mind to me is the cost of college. And so
Mm.
there were really two main pieces of federal legislation that has led us to the point where we are now when it comes to the cost of college. And so we had the Higher Education Act of 1965 and then the Higher Education Act of 1972. And those were really two big pieces of federal legislation that increased the cost of college, not only increased the cost of college, but intentionally transferred the payment of college from the responsibility of the federal government to pay that to now the individual family is paying as the primary, payer for the cost of college. And it is not coincidental that this happened immediately after the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Mm.
And so you have this situation where historically marginalized groups are now gaining access to colleges more often, right? And we already had, for example, Black families attending historic HBCUs, so historically Black
Yeah.
colleges and universities. But with the passage of the Higher Education Act in 1965 and a lot of schools and colleges becoming more desegregated, that's when we started to see the cost of education increase. And now
Mm.
the families are responsible for paying the cost of college. And then through that was the Pell Grant that was developed, and then we had FAFSA, and then we had all these different loan service programs that allowed people to kind of take out loans, but the ramifications are obviously still felt today, right? Like even myself as a Black man who is currently in six figures of student debt, I see that firsthand. And I feel like that's one of the ways that not only has contributed to the racial wealth gap within this country. A lot of that was as a clear result of the education policies, again, the Higher Education Act of 1965 and then
Mm.
in 1972, that elevated the cost of college to where it made it more challenging for historically marginalized groups to access college. But at the same time, it has caused education to be such a commodity. And now education is completely swept in within our other capitalist systems that we have. And so instead of students going to college because they want to develop as a person or they feel like they want to experience new cultures, right? Or they want to develop a skill so that they could be able to solve a problem that they're passionate about solving. Students are going to college to get jobs. Like students
Mm.
are going to college because the way that our credentialing has exponentially increased in the US, right? Like in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, if you didn't have a college degree, you could still live a middle class lifestyle. And for a lot of people, that's not the case in 2024. And so looking at how college has been a conveyor to the middle class and how students are using college as a socioeconomic pedestal or like a socioeconomic lift to get to where they need to go instead of seeing college as really like an opportunity to learn and develop. And obviously this isn't all students, but it's all these
The
cultural
majority.
framings and
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of students are kind of having that as their main decision around college. So
Yeah. Something that I've been realizing as I'm getting older now is I start to realize how all these things that impacted me as a child or even in my teens all have this trickle down effect on who I am today. And then I went to India and I learned about how things that happened to my great great grandpa have impacted generationally down. And I think understanding how historically things that may have happened in this 1500s, 1600s, they all, nobody ever lives in a vacuum where it's only the last 30 years or it's only your life that impacts you. I think understanding how, even if it hasn't happened recently, the occurrence of a major event at any point trickles down. I mean, the pandemic, I think, is an excellent example. I mean, that without us even knowing has definitely shaped our entire globe's mind that will like impact a lot of decisions and who knows what ways for, decades, if not centuries to come. And so I think oftentimes what ends up happening is we can just be like, well, there's no issues today, therefore, or there's less issues today than there were before, therefore the history of what has happened can't be impacting today. And I think even giving this example of things that may have happened in even the 1960s still trickle down 60 years later, I think is really important to understand the connectivity of history. So one thing I'm curious to ask you about is, I 100% agree with the credentialism of the university system. And it's been really cool to come back to the Bay Area where I've been meeting a lot of people who are very anti college. They strongly believe that,
Really, that's surprising to me. In the
yeah,
Bay Area, you have a lot of people that are anti-college. Yeah, say more
especially
about.
a lot of people in tech especially have this huge belief that college is just this thing that people go to for 4 years, spend a lot of money, they don't really even learn much. The companies or themselves have to do a lot of the retraining at anyway at their own cost once they hire them, and it takes them 6 months to get up to par. They're just like, why not just have a system that allows them to kind of get up to that par and then find employment way quicker than it takes that 4 years, which kind of, obviously ignores the whole aspect of a holistic learning, and the thing goes long. But what I have noticed is kind of this culture that moves away from traditional college paths. So it's like you dropped out of school, it becomes kind of something that's cool, right? I mean, you're able to drop out of school and build your own company, as opposed to someone who's able to collect a whole bunch of degrees becomes more of the thing that's desired. One thing I'm curious about is I want to touch on your concept of design thinking. And I think often when we focus on a lot of these holistic things, I think it's possible that the 12 years of education that you have before you go to college could be more than enough. And where all the education that you need could be done in 12 years. It's possible that you could avoid a lot of these things simply from making college a thing that's not really required at all anymore. And so I wanted to touch on design thinking and then perhaps generalizing that more into how that could be a useful framework where maybe one day college becomes antiquated.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about design thinking. And so, for those who aren't familiar, design thinking is not just a process, but it's also a mindset. So, I want to get into the process first. And so, design thinking, there's really five simple steps to it. And so, it's to empathize with your audience, is to then ideate solutions based off of what you've collected from your audience. Then you actually like design the thing. So you put it together, you prototype it, so you launch it, and you have whoever you're trying to serve engage with it, and then you assess. So we have this process of, again, empathize, define. So you're defining the problems, you ideate, you prototype, and then you assess. It's kind of this 5-step process, and this process is really taken it's had a lot of popularity over the past couple of decades. It's a popular framework in when it comes to developing businesses and startups. Is a popular framework in a lot of nonprofit and community based work. And so you're empathizing with the people who are quote unquote on the ground or the residents of a particular community before you design a program, asking what are the challenges that you're facing? What would you like to see in our programming? So a lot of nonprofits use it. I use it to design courses. A lot of learning designers use it to design courses. So before you sit down with just a list of topics and a list of activities to go with the topics, how are those topics being informed? Like, where are you getting the ideas for the topics? Is it actually coming from the learners who are going to be engaging with them? And it's kind of back to this idea of decolonizing the curriculum. So instead of you projecting what you feel like your students should know, there's a little bit of that, right? Like the teacher has some expertise, but opening up opportunities for students to be able to say, what do you want to learn? What are you most curious about? And like what type of learning works best for you. And so it's a useful tool for human-centered design of programs, of businesses, of classes. And I use it even in the public speaking that I do too. And so I give a lot of keynotes, I give a lot of workshops around student success. I give workshops from everything to public speaking workshops for students, so teaching students how to do public speaking, to workshops on mental health and like mental well-being strategies that students can kind of integrate into their own practice. And I use design thinking to design a lot of those learning environments that I create. So
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm thinking is with the innovation of, I mean, even Coursera, right? And I want to come back to possibly making college antiquated one day. If we're able to use these type of design thinkings to build in a curriculum and resources for people to be educated in a specific way for, from the age that they're 5 to 18 and even longer, it seems that all the access, like, I mean, what do you think it is that a college gives you that you can't get elsewhere nowadays? I mean, maybe we can start there.
College, so I went to a liberal arts college. I went to a tiny liberal arts college in Westminster, Maryland, only about 2,000 students. And so my experience in college will be a lot different from somebody who went to the University of Maryland, about 35 miles away, that has 30,000 students. And so I had smaller class sizes. I had professors at Georgetown, a lot of, not at Georgetown, at McDaniel, at Georgetown too. Like, that's not what I'm saying, but in the example that I'm trying to give, I had a lot of professors who cared about their teaching, which is actually pretty rare at the college level because most college professors are adjuncts. So they're part time faculty, like the majority of professors who teach at the college level are part-time faculty. At the same time, most of those educators don't have any formalized teacher training. Like, they're not trained to be educators, they're trained to be researchers. And so they're coming into the classroom with this research expertise and this knowledge expertise, but they don't have the same type of expertise or orientation to classroom engagement that a lot of K through 12 teachers have, for example. And so I was fortunate to have professors at McDaniel who really cared about their teaching. And I learned a lot of soft skills that are really important today. And so I even kind of want to restructure or reorient that, right? Like, it doesn't even make me feel right to call them soft skills. I've heard other scholars call them super skills because these are not only the skills that will help students live a more meaningful life, a more healthy life, because now we're talking about like health habits, but also develop the skills that employers are looking for. I cite this report all the time. It's a report that came out in 2023 from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and over technical skills. So technical skills was like the fourth most desired skill that they looked for in recent college graduates. And so it was the report surveyed hundreds of organizations throughout the country that hire recent graduates. And the top two skills that they look for in recent graduates in 2023 was problem solving and the ability to work in teams. So again, problem solving and the ability to work in teams. You can take an entire class and not learn either of those things,
Yeah.
especially at the college level. You can sit in the back of the class, your professor is lecturing, you're given homework, you're asked to recite information, you're asked to remember information. You might be asked to make a connection here and there. There are some students that go through an entire college class without speaking to any of their classmates. And so the college that I went to really allowed us to develop the problem solving, the analytical skills, right? The ability to work in teams. It was an incubator and a space for us to cultivate those skills so that when we step into the workplace, we're already strong in those things. Because the
Mm,
workplace traditionally doesn't, they're not teaching you about problem solving necessarily. They're not teaching you how to work in teams. They're teaching you about the software that they want you to use, right? Like, they're teaching you about how to log your work hours. Like, they're teaching you, uh, it might be topical knowledge related to fixing a car or related to international affairs or what have you, but to actually have a space where you can practice those skills. So being able to analyze, being able to, even things like work-life balance. A lot of organizations don't teach that. And there's a ton of research to come out over the past 10 years about how specific career fields, law is one of them. A lot of healthcare professions struggle with the idea of burnout, so like professional burnout. And so we have these nurse practitioners, for example, that a large percent of them within the first 3 to 5 years are completely burnt out. They need to seek mental
mm.
health resources and all of these different things, right? And so those are the types of skills that we can teach students at the college level. And to kind of get to your question about whether college is antiquated today, we can do a better job of even integrating that type of education at the high school and middle school level too, through social emotional learning programs and things like that. But yeah, I think that was like the biggest thing for me, college as not only helping me develop those skills. And I'm going to say one more thing too, because you asked about kind of what the value of college was for me. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, went to a predominantly black high school. My high school was like 95% black. And that was my first time around a majority of people that didn't look like me.
Hmm.
And so that's also a part of what college does because of our history of redlining and segregation in this country. We have people that they never encounter different political views or different ways of living, different lifestyles until they become an adult. And so, how can we expose students to that a little bit earlier in the process to help them with those intercultural communication skills, to help them build that empathy toward people who didn't grow up with the same religious beliefs, that didn't grow up with the same financial outlook on life, and all of these different things? And again, your employer isn't going to teach you those things. Right. And so we're facilitating an environment to where students are learning those really crucial skills that even employers themselves have said that they're looking for and that they're not getting.
Hmm. I think you broke that down very well. Yeah, I mean,
Like,
and I think where the difficulty becomes is where people have to figure out whether it makes financial sense for them to go or not. And so I have fun little, I mean, yeah, for all the things that you learned, I mean, is it possible to put a number that would have been too high for those same lessons and perhaps that money could have been spent elsewhere? I guess is the question, right?
yeah, that's an important question. I think so. I know that if you look at the current research on the return on investment of college today, if you earn a college degree today, you will still make $1.2 million on average more over the course of your life than someone who just earns a high school diploma. Right. And that still holds true. And that number has even increased over the past decade or so. So the return on investment. So when you think of 1.2 million, and at the high end, it might cost you 100,000, 150,000 if you don't get any scholarships to go to college. So you're still making your money back over the course of your life for an average amount of students. That's not every student. But on average, college is still worth it when you talk about the financial return on investment. But I think the non-fiscal return on investment, so the non-financial aspects of college, it's hard to put a value on that because if you're not learning it in college, in our current education system, if you're not learning it in college, then where are you learning it at? You might have an
Mm,
amazing K through 12 school district that's really like prioritizing social emotional learning, and you're talking about these different topics and having really interesting conversations in high school, and you might be more prepared as a young adult to where you don't necessarily have to learn those skills. But I would say that that is a very, very small number of K through 12 school districts who have those kind of supports in place. So
yeah. Yeah. You know, I just wanted to add a point to this because I feel like when I think about why school often leaves people unprepared, I think the best way to do it is to look at it is I feel like school creates an environment that's far, far different than what you'll ever experience in the rest of your life. I mean,
that's right.
when you become
Yep.
an adult, there are no rules. I mean, there really are no rules. There's no one standing over your head saying, "Hey, if you don't show up at this time, you're in trouble." Or if you know, you kind of have to some extent the choice to learn what you want. If you're interested in learning about archery, you can go and learn archery. If you're interested about learning about singing or you want to pick up singing, or you want to learn physics, I mean, you have your time is in your hands for the most part and you can pick what you want to do. And you can also pick how much effort. There's no like punishment, there's no grades, there's no grade in life. There's no you got to C today, you got to F today. School sets you up to think that life is going to be a certain way and it's not. And so regardless of whether it's a university or if it's undergrad, I have found grad school to be the first place that I felt like education was very similar to what the real world is like, where you have full autonomy, where you're able to pick what you want to research. Nobody really cares whether you turn in your homework assignment or not. If you have something that's really pressing on your time, you're able to talk to the professor and be like, hey, my kid needs to go to the hospital. I can't finish this assignment in time. And they are understanding. Until you're a kid, nobody, unless you're like, oh, someone's dying or something, nobody's okay with you just saying, hey, I actually just have a lot on my plate today. I'm not able to finish this. And so it's like you're kind of stripped of all your autonomy and you're not really even able to be a full-fledged person, even in high school, to where when you're thrown into the world, you're completely left unprepared. And I find that undergrad often resembles a lot of similar things. You have a bit more freedom, but it is very similar in many ways to high school. And so my hunch is that so long as you don't kind of open it up to where people can be more critical, which is one of the best parts of being an adult. You're allowed to be critical. You're allowed to say, I don't like this. You can't really say that as a kid. If you say that to your teacher, hey, I don't like the way you teach, you're not allowed to say that. And so my thing is, I think there is too far of a difference between what the world outside of education looks like and what the world inside of education looks like.
I do feel colleges are making strides toward making the college experience more for students more reflective of the world through community-based education, through like really intensive study abroad programs. So not just sending students to Spain so that they can act like they're on vacation, but like having them work with Spanish organizations, like having them kind of ingratiate themselves within the culture. Again, for a lot of students, this is their
Mm,
first time even leaving the country or leaving their hometown, let alone going to a completely different country. I think, I think of schools like Berea College to where you work at the college as a part of your instruction. Like that's a required element. So if you enroll as a student
mm,
in Berea College, every single undergraduate student has a job on campus. Like that's how they support their campus. As a smaller university, they provide um, a lot of these positions are paid and students get to work their whole time that they're at Berea and then talk about their work experiences as a part of their learning in their other classes. And so that's an example of like different. So we do have colleges and universities around the country who are taking
mm.
these different approaches to making education more culturally relevant and more reflective of what students could see themselves doing, after graduation. So
Very cool. I feel like, yeah, I guess I haven't really um, spent time with nor really learned about some of the alternative the college space as well. That sounds like a lovely school. So I guess
mhm.
the last question I really want to talk to you and kind of discuss is you ended up choosing to pursue JD Speaks. And so what is the core of your message? And what is JD Speaks, if you'd like to share about that as well?
Yeah, so I want to start with the core of my message and now getting to kind of how I built it. And so JD JD Speaks is about a trauma-informed approach to student success. And so what I'm finding is that right now, the US Surgeon General told us in 2023 that we are in a youth mental health crisis. And in talking to students all around the country, I've identified that like one of the number one challenges that they have is the stress around their lives after graduation, and what kind of lives they're going to lead as adults, and getting students to see themselves as not working to get a certain position, not working in school to compete against each other to get to like this status, but to see themselves as designers and young people who can create solutions to the problems in society that they want to solve. I think we have a real issue with a lack of hope and resilience for our young people. And I don't blame them for that. Our schools have not done a great job of, again, cultivating those critical thinking skills. And again, it comes back to critical pedagogy. Like, are you giving students the opportunity to learn about these social systems that they've been wanting to learn about, but they have communicated that they haven't had the chance to really explore like that? So, a lot of my work is to get students to intersect. And I use this really simple framework for students to understand how they can use design thinking to design their own lives, right? And so this is the
Mm,
simple framework that I give. So students should operate at the intersection of the skills that they have, the problems in the world that they want to solve, and the the skills, the problems, and their interests, right? Like, do you actually
mm.
like doing the thing? And so those are the three main things that are kind of the ingredients for student success. Are you doing
Ikigai.
things that you're good at? Huh? Say it again.
It's a ikigai. Have you heard of that? It's a Japanese
No, no.
concept for, yeah, it's just
Oh,
it's
got it.
great.
Okay.
That's a word
And
for
I
it
and I
though.
had never heard of it, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to check it out now.
But
Yeah,
continue,
yeah,
sorry.
but yeah, no problem. Yeah, so the are you actually good at do you feel like you're good at something? Like, are you adding value to your work, to a learning environment? So, are you doing things that you're skilled in? Do you have problems in the world that you're passionate about solving? Is it climate change? Is it politics? Even if you're a student that loves cooking or video games, I try to tell these students all the time, like, you might love rapping or you might love cooking, and you're like, Jordan, these aren't social problems that need to be solved. Well, there are people in the world that think that video games are immature and dumb, right? And so you're not just playing video games. What is your passion behind video games? Like, what would you say to the person that's trying to take video games away from you? What are the barriers that stop people from starting a cooking channel? Or
Mm,
what are the challenges that people face when it comes to work-life balance or even access to food markets to be able to buy the food to cook? Like, it goes beyond just the doing of the thing. What are
mm,
the problems in the world that you're passionate about solving? And then also the third thing, which was the interest. Do you like what you do? So you might say that I'm really good at basketball and I am I'm really passionate about it. I'm passionate about the concept of basketball, but what happens when you lose interest in it once you get into college? Like, do you have the self-awareness to say, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this. I'm going to explore sports journalism, or I'm going to explore sports writing. I'm going to, explore entrepreneurship or business. And so giving students the freedom to see themselves as designers and not finished products when they graduate. And just the last thing,
mm,
I feel like I've been struggling a lot with this with students at Georgetown, extremely high achieving. Only 9% of students, 9 to 10%, it might be closer to 12 students, 12% of students get into Georgetown. So they've already had to go through all of these really hyper competitive processes in order to get into Georgetown. And there's this pressure to perform. There's this pressure to sound smart. There's this pressure to have the perfect internship at Goldman Sachs by the summer of your sophomore year, right? Like, all these pressures that students have, and it's getting them to decenter their performative self, to decenter that thought in the back of their heads that's saying, like, this is where you should be, this is the type of job that you should have. You even have their parents that are in their ear that are saying, this is the job that you're expected to have, and getting them to see themselves as designers of their own life, but more specifically designers of the problems in the world that they want to solve. So that's what my work with students is all about.
very cool. And so you speak about this all over the place, and you've
Yeah,
done
yeah.
conferences, that's awesome. And you run your podcast now. Shout out the podcast name.
Yeah, so it's called Help Students Win. And so I am talking to teachers and school leaders that are helping students win. And so what I realized is that this work not only falls on students, but as I was saying a little bit earlier, educators share a lot of responsibility in this space. School district superintendents share responsibility. College deans that are running teaching and learning programs, right? So that's kind of my audience. And I'm talking to different people that are helping students win, both inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom. So
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's nice to meet other people who are approaching it from just a more alternative space, because I mean, you never know. It could really, sometimes content could be what helps a person get through a certain problem that they have, and you never know when it could be yours. And so I think it's
yeah.
really nice that I love watching your stuff too. It always keeps me on my toes.
I
So
appreciate it, man. I love watching your stuff too, man. You're killing it with the podcast. And yeah, I'm just trying to stay consistent. I was telling the podcast guest that I had on the last episode that I record, sometimes we need to hear the same message over and over again, right?
mm,
Like, sometimes when you first hear something, your mind isn't ready to receive it. But when you start to hear it from different people, you start to hear it framed different ways, you start to explore it a little bit more. You start to build a little bit more confidence around the idea. And so that's what I hope I'm doing with the students that I speak to in my speaking engagements, but also the educators that I'm able to reach with the podcast. Is like, I know that facilitating difficult conversations in the classroom is not easy. It's difficult work. But
mm,
remembering why you did it and remembering that it's really about what the students are taking from that experience. I think just continuing to share that message
mm.
is important. So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking your time and spending and sharing all your knowledge.
yeah, thank you, Gotham. This was an amazing conversation. I appreciate you having me.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.